You're watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. Very recently, Cradle, the startup organization that assists startups, have launched two big products, and they have allocated about 26 million ringgit for that. Cradle is renowned to assist a bunch of startups in Malaysia for the longest of time. But very recently, they've also hired a new CEO, Rafiza Ghazali, previously of Astro, and the conversation is always about what will be the shape and form of Cradle moving forward, not only because of the pandemic, the situation that is impacting us, but also the ecosystem of the startups that is befuddling the Malaysian business ecosystem. So joining us in her first televised interview, Rafiza Ghazali, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. Thanks for having me here.
First question is, have you settled into your role at Cradle?
Definitely. I feel like I've settled in even before I joined the company because, as as we all know, the situation is very critical, especially to the startup ecosystem. So I have to get go from my first day.
One thing interesting is that you guys launched two new products, the CIP Ignite, which is also an interesting conversation to be had. But these two new products, it's like, is 26 million enough?
Of course not, but it's not just about the 26.5 million. It's, as you all know, everyone is facing through a tough time, not just the startup. So, we understand the government needs to make sure that, everyone benefits from all the packages that's made available. So we make the best of what we have at the moment. 26.5 million, yes, it's not very large, and hence why we need to be very, very selective.
Let's do a quick relook into the VC structure of the world right now. Previously, Sand Hill Road was driving that kind of innovation in Silicon Valley. China also has its own ecosystem that is very vibrant. They understand the market respectively. Both Sand Hill understands the European as well as North American market. China understands the local domestic market, which is of course 1.7 billion consumers right there. We seem to be in that blind spot where the conversation is always on deprived capital towards startups per se. If you are a company that has a scalable business that can commercialize best in the shortest time possible, you tend to get money from elsewhere. But that startup ecosystem in Malaysia has always been in the doldrums for the longest of time. Do you think that Cradle has met that kind of requirements over time, and therefore can help that local startup industry?
As you all know, Cradle, our mandate is to provide grants to the early stage startups, and there are various players, government agencies under mostly or funding agencies that provide the funding at different stage of the funding cycle, right? So ours is very much, concentrated on the early stage. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, in terms of funding, that's obviously the riskiest part. So a lot of investors tends to, skew towards more post-Series A and high growth. So there is a bit of a gap there, and hence why we need to not just rely on grant. We need to work on, how else can we put in alternative funding in that space.
Okay, let's talk about some of the plans you have, or some of the early visions that you might want to execute in your role as the new CEO of Cradle. What would be the idea that you imagine Cradle to do in the near term?
Okay. Immediate focus is to work with our startups. 26.5 million, that's more than the funding itself to make sure that our startups survive. So the last couple of months, we have been focused to provide support on non-monetary wise, assistance, working with them, looking at their cash flow,
coaching,
looking at their business.
mentoring.
Yes, not just that, and what we're trying to do, we're trying to encourage more partnerships, because if you're a founder at the moment, you just want to survive. But you can't, after a while, it gets to a period, you need a business. So that is what Cradles is looking at the moment. we're working, we're encouraging the startups to work among themselves. We've seen that some of our startup, are giving discounts on their services to the other startups. So we really encourage that, and we make known to our recipients about some of these available incentives. That's number one. And number two is looking at their cash flow. How else could they, make sure that they have the business? So we're looking at partnerships with corporates, with governments, how the startups can serve the corporates and the governments, and also looking at how they can work with universities to see, make sure that their product is actually relevant post-pandemic.
On that last point, a few years ago, I went to Sweden and tried to see what they're trying to do between the three parties. They call it the triple helix model, where the university was creating that research that the industry wants and is being funded sometimes by the industry, sometimes by the government. And that triple helix model seems to create that we only create solutions for a problem that is in existence. And this is, of course, an interesting way to look at things. It's not blue sky kind of situation the way Silicon Valley does, but it does create a lot of solutions for a lot of corporations in Sweden, for Volvo, for IKEA, for Saab in the defense realm. Maybe we should approach that kind of situation instead of trying to blue sky situation.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, at the moment, given the situation, we should explore any possible avenues that can help with the startups. The example that you gave, I came from Sime Darby and I was in the innovation team. We work very closely with universities, local universities, foreign universities. They have breakthrough ideas or breakthrough, technology. But, we believe that the startups would probably be better at commercializing this technology because, universities, their focus is very much in, R&D. Startups wants to make money. Corporates wants to make money as well and want to address their solutions. And that's how I see the connectivity between these three, parties. And that's what we're trying to encourage, and hence why with our recent CIP Ignite and CIP Accelerate, we've expanded our, target recipients to not just startups. We've now opened up to spin-offs from research institutes and universities. And we also allow for SMEs, smaller SMEs, not big SMEs, because, the bigger ones can have other funding agency that they can go to. So we see a lot of this because, as you all know, the, startups, they can't survive with just good products. It must be put in use. So this is what we are trying to do.
One of the reasons why Silicon Valley succeeds really well is because of the proximity of Stanford University and all the other polytechnics around it in that area. And because of that research, innovation, academia, can work in tandem with the startups that is nearby there. Do you think that because you guys are opening up to research universities that can be spun off into commercial bodies, you're going to get some interesting results from that?
Yeah, I mean, we are in a digital world. Why limit ourselves working with universities just around our area? You can have access now. There's so many platforms where you can reach out to any university, be it in Europe, be it in Silicon Valley, China, India. So that's why we feel that, yes, you're absolutely right. Perhaps 10 years ago, that's why it was able to flourish. But we are in a digital world. So we should not just limit to working with, who's around us.
The reality is that Malaysia is a very small market. When you talk about in relation to, say, Indonesia, Vietnam, 300 million combined, ASEAN 700 million, China domestic 1.7 million, India 1.3 billion, that kind of thing. Do you think that Cradle needs to help the people that you guys are helping to regionalize at least their business, if not make it international?
I'll give you an example. Work with corporates that have got international presence. You have an immediate scale opportunity there. Like for example, a lot of our GLCs have operations, not just in ASEAN region, in Africa, in other, Eastern, what you call it, Middle Eastern countries. So if you can create, a synergy and a partnership with these corporates, it provides an immediate scale opportunity. So rather than, the startups go to each of these countries, work with companies that has already got regional presence. The minute, it's validated in a local market, you can immediately expand.
Okay, we'll take one short break before we continue a conversation with the CEO of Cradle. Don't go anywhere. Thanks for staying on with us. I am with Rafiza Ghazali, the new CEO of Cradle. Rafiza, let's talk about some of the long-term planning for Cradle. Is Cradle supposed to exist forever, or is there a time for you guys to reshape yourself and be folded into a different type of organization around the government agencies?
I don't think we have a crystal ball to know whether or not we're going to be, relevant after 5 years. As you all know, the conditions change so fast. For me, we need to make sure that we address the problem statement, i.e. solutions. So if, for example, in 5 years' time or, longer time plan, if Cradle can play a role in the funding, especially at the early stage, yes, of course we will be. But if there's no reason for Cradle to be existed, if there are other means or ways of, the startups can get funding, then perhaps, we might want to consider repurpose. But I don't think so.
The way the way the pandemic is being approached, it's very troubling to look at the business environment moving forward. Vaccine conversations have now dropped. People are less optimistic in terms of how the pandemic is going to be resolved in the long term. We have flattened the curve, but it doesn't seem that this thing is going away. Therefore, the continued behavior of this whole MCO prolonged situation is very realistic these days. How does this impact the business or the commercialization aspect of startups? Do you think that they really are, cut up against the challenge that is facing them?
Some we found perhaps their idea or the solution may be less needed, post-pandemic. And that's when, we work closely with them to see whether or not their solutions make sense post-pandemic. And what we found is some of them pivoted. We've seen some of our recipients did just that, and in fact doing better post-pandemic compared to before because they were first out in the market to address the issue. So these are the sort of things, and to me what's interesting is that this pandemic gives us the opportunity to actually see who can survive, the resiliency of these founders or the people who are in the startup, and some who are slightly slow in adapting. These are the ones that struggle. That's number one. And number two, how disciplined they have been with respect with the financials. As we all know, some startups are very cost conscious, some less so, and so we found that those who have really good financial discipline tend to survive better than compared to those that are not. So it's a really good time to really reflect and then to see what are the things that we should look out to see, okay, which are the startups that we should really fund.
The previous relationship that Cradle has with the VCs of the world is actually quite warm. You guys do speak to them a lot. What is the relationship then moving forward?
We, like I said, we are very focused in our mandate. As much as possible, we work, like you say, we partner, we collaborate with the other funders, because the important is that our recipients have access to further funding and not just rely on grant. So we will continue to do that.
The funneling process of startups coming to your pathway, how's that coming along? Is it very troublesome trying to find the best out of the best?
Yes, because you see, the thing is, and the good thing about, in technology and innovation is that there's no, it's very difficult to get a benchmark, who is better than the other. But what we found that working with them along the way, there are certain factors that really stands out, one startup to the other. So these are, because you see, the thing is, at the early stage, it's not just about giving the money. Our people and the startups, we have very close relationship, engagement with the startups to work very closely with them, and not just us, the mentors. So these are, sometimes we found some of the insights that we see. Not to say that we are an expert whether or not they will survive or they will, they will be successful. But what we've noticed that there are certain, small things that that makes them stand out.
In your early meetings with your team, precisely, this is the area that I want to ask. What would be some of the learnings that you got when you spoke to the investment team when they do their work? What are the ideas that you wanted to ask from them?
To me, like
the
relationship with the startups, to really understand, like I said, we're not private equity, we're not passive investors. We are putting in government's money. We need to make sure that the money is well invested in the startups. So it is also, our vested interest to make sure that the startups not just pass the commercialization stage, that they become meaningful startups, impactful startups to the economy.
Isn't that the best way to be meaningful, to be commercialized?
Well, just that, and then after that, what's next?
Make money lah.
Easy to say, but are they really addressing the critical solutions? Yes, of course, you're right, making money, but at the same time, they also need to have the ripple effect. They need to make sure that they are in a position to create more jobs, so that more people benefits, not just the startups.
All right. Okay. We'll go for one more break before we conclude our conversation with the CEO of Cradle. Thanks for staying on with us. I've been speaking with the new CEO of Cradle. This is a new step for you. You've always been entrenched in either auditing or accounting or GLC. How's the transition been from working or spending your entire career in established companies to now trying to build startups? Is it a smooth transition, you would say?
Okay, this is the thing, right? When I look at Cradle, we have to remember, Cradle is a government agency. It's not a startup. So how different Cradle is compared to, say, for example, some of the organizations that I've been, which, like I was at Dana Harta, that was an MOF company. I was at Chagamas, that was, owned by Bank Negara. So Cradle is just another government agency, but serving the startups. You're absolutely right. Perhaps, the startups, is probably something new to me. But I'm very lucky because, as part of MOSTI, we get a lot of support from, the other government agencies, Malaysian Venture Capital and, Malaysian Debt Ventures, Magic, we're all working together, leveraging on each other's strengths. I have a fantastic team. The company has been around for 2003. We've got a lot of institutional insights in there. So for me, I see my role to make sure that the engine goes smoothly so that we can serve the ecosystem as best as we could.
All right, Mosti is of course the driving force behind female leaders. You are one of the many that is leading agencies inside Mosti. How does it make you feel?
I don't see gender as anything special. To me, I always believe that, if you got what it takes, it doesn't matter whether you're a male or female, you deserve it.
Okay. Final question to you. Let's talk about Cradle right now. Do you think that you can spend the entire 26 million or 26.5 million within that time frame, or are you going to deplete that very fast so that all these startups can really hit the ground running?
Well, from what we see, it will be a period. We believe perhaps maybe between 3 to 6 months. The last thing we want is to just provide everything at the moment, because I think what we're seeing, there are some startups who may not be eligible at the moment. They have potential that may be eligible, say for example, in 3 months' time, 4 months' time. So we are trying as much as possible to get the best and stagger it.
If some of the startups are watching this interview, what would be your message to them?
Well, just continue to work on your solutions, work on your technology, and if it meets the eligibility criteria, please come to us.
There you go. That was my conversation with Rafiza Ghazali of Cradle. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to Astro and look for Notepad over there. You can also watch these interviews on your mobile devices. Just download the Astro app wherever you get the application. Also, a friendly note, Cradle has always been there for me personally, as well as the organization, Astro and my organization before that, BFM. And I really hope and wish you guys really do well, because the success of you means that there will be a lot more successes for the startups in Malaysia. That's it from me for today. Until next time, goodbye.